Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Erin Schmidt. I'm the Marketing and Communications Coordinator here at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, and also going to be the Tech Director and Assistant for the evening. So if you have any issues, you can always just chat with me directly. And as again, like I said at the very beginning, as most of you have been in Zoom meetings very often in the last couple of years, we just ask everyone to please stay muted during the presentation. Welcome all to this evening. We're going to be talking with the artist whose work is represented in Resilience, a Sansei Sense of Legacy. That's on view right now at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon in Portland until December 23rd. So there's still a few weeks left to come see the exhibition. We'll be speaking tonight, Lucy Capehart, Director of Exhibitions and Collections, and Chisao Hata, the creative director of Living Arts program here at JAMO, will be your hosts tonight. Just a few quick things. Like I said, please stay muted. The session is recorded. You should have received that notification when you entered the Zoom. And we will, make that available in some form. I think look out for an email, probably since I think everyone shared their emails with us. We'll let you know about that. There will be opportunity for a question and answer at the end of the session. So if you think of things, you have questions or comments, you can go ahead and put those in the chat anytime, and then I'll be sure to look through them and make sure our artists get those questions. So I am just going to hand this over to Chisao, and of course, thank our artists for being here, and she'll kick off the rest of the event.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here this evening. We're going to start with a land acknowledgement before we start the program. So I will start with that. This land acknowledgement recognizes and respects the lands that we occupy and is done in support of greater truth-telling and reconciliation efforts. It is one small step toward addressing the harm that has historically been and continues to be perpetuated against Native and Indigenous people and their communities. We respectfully acknowledge the people of the land that is occupied by the Japanese American Museum of Oregon and the Japanese American Historical Plaza. The Portland metro area rests on the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, the Cowlitz, the Kathlamet, Clackamas, and bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Molalla, and many tribes who have made their home along the Columbia River. We want to thank the original caretakers of this land and acknowledge the tribal governments and their stewardship, as well as the communities of Indigenous people that live in this area today. We stand as allies in the continued fight for the health and sovereignty of this land. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Lucy Capehart, our exhibits and collections.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, we welcome three amazing artists who are part of the exhibit we have here at JAMO, Resilience, a Sansei Sense of Legacy, curated by Gail Enns and Jerry Takigawa, who's with us tonight. The exhibition is sponsored by the Mid-America Arts Alliance with support from the National Endowment for the Arts. It will be here at JAMO until December 23rd, and then it will move on to the Washington State Historical Society in Tacoma, Washington. I'm just going to give some information about each artist. So Kristine Aono is a Washington, D.C. based sculptor and installation artist. She earned her BFA from Washington University in St. Louis and attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. Her work has been exhibited nationally, including solo exhibitions at the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, the International Sculpture Center in Washington, D.C., the the Long Beach Museum of Art, and the Washington Project for the Arts in Washington, D.C. On to Naomi. Naomi, I should add, has kindly joined our discussion after Reiko was unable to attend. So thank you, Naomi. Naomi's Judy Shintani's work generates visual stories and brings vital issues to light through assemblage, installation, performance, and facilitated social engagements. Naomi has a master's degree in transformative art from JFK University and a BS in graphic design from San Jose State University. Her work has been exhibited nationwide, including at the University of Pittsburgh, Peninsula Museum of Art, Burlingame, California, and the Santa Fe Institute. She founded the Kitsune Community Art Studio in Half Moon Bay and is currently a teaching artist at Foothill College in the Bay Area. Jerry Takigawa, photographer and curator of this exhibit, has been exhibited worldwide, including at the New Orleans Photo Alliance, Griffin Museum of Photography in Massachusetts, the San Francisco Museum of Craft and Design, and the Los Angeles Center of Photography, among other places. Jerry studied photography with Don Worth at San Francisco State University and received a degree in art with an emphasis in painting. Jerry lives and works in Carmel Valley, California. And I want to add, we were generously gifted 4 of Jerry's prints from this series for our collection, which we're really happy about. So on to the questions.
So we are so excited to have these 3 artists who are part of Resilience, a Sansei Legacy, that will be showing at the Japanese American Museum until December 23rd. So we encourage all of you to tell your friends, bring your family, and visit the museum. We're going to talk a little bit individually to each artist, have a short conversation, and then after that, we'll all gather together and have a longer conversation. And then following that, we'll please put any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll get to your questions following our group conversation. So Jerry, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit, because you're co-curator of this exhibit, can you tell us about the history, how the exhibit came to be, how it started, how it emerged, and how did you go about making some of the selections? What was the process involved?
Thank you. That's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But, so in 2018, I attended a photography portfolio review in Santa Fe, and which is just like the Photo Lucida you have in Portland, Oregon, which I attended this year. And I was a couple of years into developing Balancing Cultures, which is about family history of my family's experience with World War II. And I was seeking exhibition venues, and I met a woman named Kathy Dowell, who is the Director of Arts and Humanities at Mid-America Arts Alliance. And she was interested, and we did some follow-up, and I learned about what they did, which is every function that a museum has, they have, except for curation. So they are welcoming various curatorial ideas. So she also suggested that although they do solo exhibitions, that group exhibitions are actually more readily accepted in terms of museums and galleries taking them on. And so with that suggestion, I contacted Gail Enns, a friend of mine. We had met at another exhibition that she had called Transcendental Vision, and we decided to work on this exhibition together. And we invited also Larry Oda, who was past president of National JACL, and actually recently was reelected as president of the JACL. Anyway, the story of balancing cultures is about the internment, and for my family, it was a little of before, during, and after. And so, it was a story that I told through my memories and what I learned in my research and ultimately my interpretations of a lot of their feelings. And so this became somewhat of our theme for resilience. It also, the Sansei portion of the subtitle, that came about because of the observation that the Sansei were most likely the last to have direct contact with either the camp or camp survivors. And, it would add to the clarity and the intensity of the emotional expression that the artist could bring to their work. So that's how the title works into this. But we had met for many months, and both working on the proposal and the curatorial criteria, including writing the title, which went through its own time period. But if 2018 was the inception of this exhibition, we probably spent a good 2 years putting it together and submitting that proposal then to Mid-America, who took another year to develop a marketing, educational, and sales program to vet this idea. So after a year, they did greenlight resilience, and here we are today. This is the second venue, I believe. And once it was greenlighted, invited also to create the exhibition identity and later on the catalog. So the question that's the hardest is how do we select the artists, and it really the selection always begins with the artists that are in your network, and that's just normal for any curators. But we wanted beautiful, well-crafted, original, concepted work that really spoke to the theme with feeling. And there were a lot of technical things that had to come into play. The artist, well, of course, needed to be Sansei, and with an established voice. And the traveling exhibition itself kind of put up a lot of barriers of the number of artists. We decided would be 8 to try to keep that in a certain scale. And the window for touring was 5 years. So this will be on tour for 5 years. So the work had to be finished and could be available for the 5 years. So there were a lot of things that started to eliminate things, other ideas and people that we had in mind. We also wanted a variety of media. And of course, it started out with my photography project, but it's so great to be included with all this mixed media that we have in this show. I think lastly, we needed to have a certain scale of complexity, and that could be packed, unpacked, installed, deinstalled over a 5-year period so that it was durable. And those are really the criteria that we use to select. And it was developed over the 2 years that we worked on this. So it wasn't just like we came up with a list, but that's my report on how this thing came to be.
Thank you so much. And it's really good to know that it does take so long to get an original idea going and to develop this fabulous exhibit that we're glad it's touring on. So Lucy has a question now for Kristine.
Kristine, so can you share your creative process with us on the Daruma of resistance? And have there been any reactions to your work that were interesting or surprising?
Sure. So the title is Dharma of Resilience. And this piece actually came to me, the idea for this piece came to me in 2018. And that was when, shortly after the president had issued an executive order that came to be known as the Muslim travel ban. But that was a time when we were seeing a dismantling of civil rights and an increase in what seemed to be racism and bigotry against oppressed groups. And I know that personally, it was a time of great despair, seeing the civil rights being dismantled. So I usually start a piece with a lot of research. I've done a lot of research where I've traveled to the sites of all the 10 WRA incarceration camps, and I've spent many long hours in the National Archives, and I read a lot, and I gather a lot of resources when I'm trying to answer questions. So when all this turmoil was happening, and it's ongoing, I was trying to think of, what do we as people do when times are tough like this? And I was reminded of when Executive Order 9066 was issued, and all the unjust actions that happened following that. But what I think is kind of a ray of hope is knowing that redress worked. It took over 40 years later for it to happen, but communities gathered together, and with a lot of resilience and perseverance, they succeeded. But I think what was driving them was also the idea of hope. So I wanted to create a work that was about hope and about the ability to enact change and right wrongs. So the idea that came to mind was, there's a Japanese figure that's called Daruma. And Daruma is, I'm holding up a little paper mache figurine, and these are very common little figures. And they are symbols of hope. They are symbols of wishes, and they're based on a Japanese legend of a Buddhist monk who meditated so long and so devotedly that he lost the use of his arms and his legs. And he became a symbol of resilience, because the shape of a Daruma, when you tip him over, he bounces back up, he rights himself. So it's about resilience and dedication and overcoming adversity. So from this idea of using the figure of the Daruma, I decided I would make a giant Daruma. I wanted to make something that was overpowering. And so this piece, when it's on its pedestal, is over 7 feet high. And so I use this Daruma figure as a symbol of hope and a symbol of ways to make wishes come true. So I created this Daruma. It has a surface of documents on it, and these are mostly government documents that are times when our government has issued decrees that are based largely on racism or bigotry or greed, like Executive Order 9066. So the front of this piece has the executive order front and center, and surrounding it are other documents about the camps and about just the efforts toward redress. So there are documents that are some of the testimony from the CWRIC hearings. Those were the Commission on Relocation and Internment of Civilians that were held in the late 80s, which were the start of the redress movement. And there's a copy of a letter that my grandfather wrote, different things about the camps and the movement towards redress. And around the back and the sides are other documents that depict government decrees that mask these acts of oppression. There's things like the Indian Removal Act of 1830, Plessy versus Ferguson, the Immigration Act of 1924, Shelby versus Holder, and also the Muslim travel ban. So the idea behind this piece is that I want to show that it takes diligence and perseverance to make sure that our government can right its wrongs and that it is possible. So this is a piece about hope, and a big part of this piece is the audience participation, or the participation by visitors to the museum. So that I've created these sticky notes that have a drawing of a daruma on it, and the eyes are blank, because what you do with the daruma is, and I should have explained this earlier, is what you do with the daruma is you make a wish. And when you make your wish, you color in one of the eyes. And once that wish has been granted or has happened, once your wish has happened, then you can fill in the second eye. So it's a piece about hope, and it's a piece about making a wish for change, because I believe that wish for change is the first step toward action. So people have, throughout the course of the exhibit, have been filling out their wishes for change, and they put them on the daruma. And so I'm really excited about seeing what the Portland area, how they respond to this call for wishes. The second part of Lucy's question was asking about reactions to this work and if I found any that were interesting or surprising. And so the first venue that this was shown at was in in Topeka, Kansas, at the Alice Sabatini Gallery. And they sent me about 350 sticky notes that had been filled out. And it was pretty amazing, that the response. The majority, or the largest type of response, was asking for world peace. There were a lot of calls for world peace and also wishes for the war in Ukraine to stop. What I found also interesting were wishes like that were more politically geared. Like there was one that said, "I wish for less political divide, no more hateful propaganda." Another said, "I wish for an end to the fear of someone who does not look like me." And another was, "I wish that we do not continue to repeat history." There were also many wishes from kids. Kids also, as guests, kids wanted a pony or a cat or a dog. There were some that were surprising, like, "I wish for a dinosaur I could ride on." And one of my favorites was, "I wish to never get a loose tooth again." But a big category of wishes were for equality and kindness and general respect for each other, which I think was really uplifting. So, like I said, I feel that these wishes for change are the first step toward action. So let's hope that these sorts of conversations can bring action and change.
Thank you, Kristine. We've enjoyed so much having this piece at the museum, and I'm curious, to the tone of all the sticky notes, of which many have been put on it. So anyone in Portland, please come down and see the exhibit, and the rest of the artists too, but this is quite a large sculpture.
I want to welcome again Omi Judy Shintani, who we have had her work at the museum. The exhibit prior to this was her Dream Refuge piece. So in this resilience exhibit, you have used what would be considered traditional clothing. And we've heard some different reactions. I'm just wondering what was behind your choice of using the kimono in this way, what inspired those choices, or what kind of reactions have you heard and experienced? But what was your motivation behind the choices? Why were those important to you?
Oh, thank you, Chisao, for those questions, and thank you for having me back to talk about my work. And these are 3 kimonos from a series called Deconstructed Kimonos. And yes, I've had a lot of interesting reaction to them. The original reason why I did my first cut kimono was I was part of a group of women artists called Northern California Women's Caucus for the Arts. And we were participating in a art creation group that we called Art Tag, where we selected a topic, and in this case, it was presence, absence. And we receive a piece of art from another artist, which influences us to create another piece of art. So I received an amazing, powerful, and very emotional piece from a woman artist whose husband had just recently passed away. And the piece was his coat that was covered with photographs of the 2 of them and his life attached to the outside of the coat. And so I received this piece and I had it in my gallery, and it was just so overwhelming and so meaningful. I thought, how am I going to respond to this work? And I decided to also do a piece which involved clothing. And I had a trunk of kimonos in my studio. And people just kept giving me kimonos. They just often didn't know what to do with them. They were changing their decor, or it was something someone brought back from Japan for them. Mostly they were from non-Japanese people. And so they've been sitting in my studio for a few years. So I thought, I am going to work with a kimono, because for me, the presence of my culture is so important, but there's also an absence of my culture. And I thought, what would be a better way to express than to take a symbol of Japan and alter it. And so I started cutting the design of the kimono away to make these spaces in the kimono, and I placed the cutout pieces in little altars underneath the kimono. And what started happening was that there was this play of light and shadow. When I lit the kimono, you could see the light coming through where typically you wouldn't normally see it. You could see the shadow of the almost skeletal outline of the kimono, and it just was so powerful. And I felt this really great connection with who might have been wearing this kimono and what it meant to them. And also it became a big meditation because it would take hours and hours to cut away the designs. So one of the things that I want to point out is that the kimonos are not being destroyed. In fact, they are being altered to become another way of expressing this important topic of loss of culture through an art piece. And I started creating more and more of them. So I have probably about 10 kimonos now that I've done this alteration with. And one of the times, or one of the events that really affected loss of culture for Japanese Americans was when they were in the camps. And often when people were released from the camps, they felt a great need to assimilate because they had been in prison for who they look like and what they thought and their culture. And so coming out of the camps, many of the Japanese Americans did not teach their children to speak Japanese. There's so many of us that are sanseis that do not speak the language, or at least not fluently. And I think that's a big loss of culture, to lose your language. So that's sort of the story of the kimonos. Another thing that I really wanted to depict by altering the kimonos was to also allow some new breathing space and new ways of being through allowing this space in the garments to give a new viewpoint or a new way of looking at life from that was a bit different than from where we may have originally came from. So the kind of merging of our Japanese culture and our American culture. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the pieces are about. And I've had a lot of interesting reactions. And after I did my first kimono, I was a bit concerned about how people were going to feel about it that were of Japanese descent. And I spoke to a friend of mine who was from Japan, and I asked her, do you think I'm really doing something that's sacrilege by cutting the kimonos? And she felt that I was making them into an art piece, that these kimonos would never have been shown otherwise, because typically used or damaged kimonos are not something that's necessarily valued in Japan. And so she felt that it was okay for me to do this, and that it was actually creating art and allowing them a new life. But I have had some people that were a little dismayed, and typically people are rather shocked by these creations. But also I've heard people express a kind of a wonder what a new beautiful way of expressing this sort of tragic loss of culture through the series.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, Jerry, I want to go back to you, which is not really listed here, but you were able to share a lot about how the exhibit came about through your co-creation, co-curator role. But you are also an artist in this exhibit. And Erin, if you wouldn't mind going back to Jerry's piece. So I know you have a long history of photography, but what inspired you to create the photographs that you have in this exhibit?
Well, you know, I kind of fully intended to address this this story, this part of our lives that we all share. And what happened was when my mother passed away, I my brother and I discovered this box of photographs in which there were a lot of pictures of my parents and my grandparents in the camps, which I, in my, I don't know, decades of being here, never saw, and they never showed them to us. There were also a lot of little documents and things that they had kept relating to the camps. And it kind of spurred me on to do the project, taking these images of them and actually, printing them out of focus to, in photographic terms, kind of fall into the background, whether it's like memory fading, and to put artifacts that I had found, and I also entirely decided to do text in these pictures, which I had never done in images before, because I wanted to leave what I would call breadcrumbs for people to understand what was happening maybe in this picture or in and around this picture. So it was kind of a new direction for me. And honestly, I was entirely, shocked by my research into what had happened to them, and that their ability to play this whole enormous incident down as much as they did, and give me a chance to integrate as an American. At the same time, I understand Naomi's want, the loss of the culture, but at the same time, they so much wanted to be part of the culture. And so they kind of gave me that opportunity by not coloring as much as they could my attitudes about the country. At the same time, I have to say that, learning the truth about everything, I still wanted to speak out about it, and also felt at the same time that I was betraying that silence that they had always presented to me. But at the same time, I think the silence was for protection, and for themselves and for me. And so in a way, I think they would have liked what I did create, because they're not here to tell me that now, but that's what I feel anyway.
Well, as a Sansei myself, I definitely relate to everything that you're saying as Sansei artist. I happen to be born in Des Moines, Iowa, and not with a lot of Japanese Americans. So my identity and experience was affected in that way, which is really one of, I think, our ongoing exploration as Sansei and Sansei artists around identity, how we relate to culture,
right,
how we continue to tell our stories. And so I just like to invite Naomi and Kristine back to have a short conversation about, our generational understanding of being a Sansei. I recently had the experience of going to Los Angeles and being part of the Book of Names with 125,284,000 names, a number that is now verified. And that experience for me was not for me. It really was about, so I can relate to what you're saying, about my parents and about my grandparents. So can we just talk a little bit about that, what it means to be of this generation, Sansei third generation, the Issei being the first that came to America, our parents being the Nisei, the second generation. We're the third, and I think now we're on our fifth and sixth generations. Our children are Yonsei, and then their children are Gosei. So how has being a Sansei from this generation impacted your work and your understanding of identity and culture? It's a big, heavy question.
I'll take a stab at that. I would say that it has a very deep and essential effect on my understanding and my artwork. As a Sansei, for people who aren't aware or aren't Japanese American, generations in our community, in the Japanese American community, we can introduce ourselves by saying, I'm Sansei, and everybody would understand what that means. Or even if you add, I'm a Sansei and my parents were at Minidoka and Jerome and Rower, that puts even more context into it. It's really very much an identifier for us. And for me, almost literally, I grew up in a brownstone in Chicago. Well, the first 5 years of we lived in this brownstone in Chicago. My aunt, up until last year, lived in that brownstone. But it was a literal depiction of our generations, because my grandparents lived on the top floor with my aunt, and the second floor, a family who was friends of ours, the Achibas, used to live there, but my aunt and her family eventually moved in, and then our family lived on the first floor. So it really was the Issei Nisei Sansei living in this brownstone. And I grew up in Chicago, which, for people who don't know this, Chicago was advertised by the government as a safe place for Japanese to move to after the camps. The government made a very concerted effort to disperse the Japanese community. A lot of people, like Jerry's family, moved to Chicago after the camps, but then went back to California when they could do that. But that generations, that the Issei Nisei Sansei, in the Japanese American community, we all identify with that. We all understand sort of our place in our culture based on that as an identifier. And Naomi made a really good point about how it's really sad that we weren't taught Japanese, because we lost a good part of our culture because we weren't taught Japanese. But it's really understandable that our parents, who were most of our parents were children when they were in those camps, and those are very formative years. They did not feel comfortable raising their children to be anything other, that they didn't want their children to be questioned on whether they were Americans. So I think we all kind of grow up with that sort of I guess kind of baggage.
Trauma. It's called trauma.
Yeah, trauma.
Generational trauma.
It is. Yeah. So I think that a lot of us in our art, that artists, we have this wonderful ability to have a vehicle to express ourselves. So that is what I have done. I've found that my artwork isn't only just an outlet for expression, but it's also been a way for me to, a means for self-discovery. So understanding my family's history, my history, our community's history has helped me to understand myself better.
Naomi, you would like to say something?
Yes, I can totally relate to what Kristine was saying, because also I feel that a lot of my work has been research, and I have done a lot of, well, not only to learn about myself and the trauma that my family went through, which was not really discussed too much. And also what happened to Japanese Americans in general. I mean, during that time, I did a lot of research on that. I also collected a lot of stories. I found myself being a narrator for different people's experiences in the camps, and also how descendants think about what happened to their families, and how the incarceration has affected their lives or our lives now, and how do we see ourselves, and there's so many different ways that people have expressed that. I mean, some people have become activists, some people have become silent, some people become angry, some people have never found out what happened to their families. So it's just this big ball of trauma that's affected so many people in so many different ways. And I actually joined with 4 other Japanese American Sansei artists, and we formed a collective called Sansei Granddaughter's Journey, and went together on some pilgrimages and created art and performance on the land, and then created a film and had some installations. So it's such a connection to be able to hear and see yourself in other people too, and to be able to acknowledge each other's stories and each other's pain and each other's way of being able to express this history. And it's important to keep it alive. I think it's incredibly important to keep it alive and to make different places so people can experience it, to have pilgrimage, to come to JAMO and be able to learn this history and be able to discuss it with each other, and to feel the effects of this on our community is so important.
We certainly are going through a period of reckoning. You think about that article that I mentioned, and there's been several other things here locally with the Nisei vets and American Legion, that it's taken 80 years. And I don't know if you know about the, Amachi and the emergence of a rose that had never bloomed before until Amachi was entered into the national park system, and they were having a kind of a gathering at Amachi, and someone saw this rose and it was blooming for the first time. So, I mean, who's to say what will happen 80 years from now, right? Sorry, I get kind of teary when I think about it. Jerry, did you?
Well, being Sansei, the experience of growing up with kind of a very large secret in the background. My life, as an artist, I've been an artist for 50 years, and it just started out by wanting to, express things for issues that, such as the environment, for example, that, didn't have a voice. So I wanted to do something immediately. I didn't know why I was drawn to all those things. I'd kind of done that my whole life. And I think, it was really ultimately because it was wanting to express the feelings that my parents and grandparents had, that they never really had a clear chance to say anything about, and to be able to say that for them as much as I could interpret that. I think that was a great kind of a part of my growing up, and like Kristine, trying to, it's a self-learning kind of process of accepting myself as Japanese, because I had been told to be so American, and to be able to, accept that along the way and bringing that into art. And I mean, it was a bit of it's very much a self-discovery journey of, identity. And, there's kind of really no end to that in a way, because it's a very deep kind of thing that happened. And, I plan to go forward and look at the idea of what Gaman is and what it means, because it's an incredibly powerful kind of position to take. And there's some mystery and deep kind of feeling about that. And I'm trying to work with other artists that are Sansei to tell me something about their experience with that. And I just want to put it back out into the world in a way that becomes a platform to look at how we can get along together on the planet, because it's getting to the point where we don't get along. There isn't a whole lot of hope for us. The planet will be here, but for us, it's going to be the end of that species.
I don't know if we have this conversation is so rich and deep. I feel like we could go on for quite a while, but I'm noticing that we have a few minutes, and I don't know, Lucy, if we have any questions that have been put into the chat that we want to bring forward. Meanwhile, we can continue to talk a little bit more about, I think, being a Sansei and really, lifting as the role of the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, not just saying this is Japanese American history, but this is all of our history. This is American history, and everybody should know this history. This is my particular history, but it should be a part of all of our American history education.
So I'll just say, in regards to the chat, there are some comments, but Terry Wong actually just asked a question about the catalog for the exhibition, which I'm sure Lucy can answer, I can answer, but and I'm getting a couple other questions. So if you want to start, if someone can answer that and start there, that would be great.
We had the catalog at our store, I know.
Yeah, we have the catalog here at JAMO. You'd like to purchase it? I didn't see what the question was, sorry.
Oh, they were just asking. So yeah, there is a catalog. Actually, it just came out. It was just published. So we're the first place with the exhibition to have the catalog, and it is available. I don't think it's available online. So I do have a question here for Kristine. So the second eye isn't filled in yet, since it's a tradition to fill it in when fortune or the luck event happens. Is it an optimistic decision to leave it unfilled, or is it a statement of non-resolution?
Well, I think that I have a lot of darumas that only have one eye on them, and some of them maybe will never get filled in, but I sort of love the idea. It's very satisfying when you do get to fill in the second eye, but I do love the idea that hope keeps us working. Hope keeps us working toward a goal. So I believe that darumas, you should have many darumas, and they can be in any stage. So
That's wonderful. These are questions from Omi and Danny, so they have another question as well for Naomi. Was there anything cathartic when you felt when cutting the kimono? So was that a cathartic experience for you? It's certainly shocking to imagine cutting of a kimono, but it's more violent to have language and culture taken away from you during assimilation. Must have been intense, or was it more positive and a feeling of freedom? How was that feeling for you?
Well, I think I started out a little tentative about it, and then it became almost very ritualistic. It became very meditative, and I thought I pondered a lot while I was doing it, like who wore this kimono? Who was this person? Why do I have this kimono? I'm supposed to be making it into an art piece. There was a lot of things that crossed my mind. It became very satisfying when I completed it, because it took a very long time to do them. And you had to be very thoughtful about how you cut them, because you didn't want it to just fall apart. You had to kind of almost disassemble it in a way that it would still hold its shape, but still be able to expose the design or the design of the kimono. I do have to say, I took a kimono sewing class from a Japanese kimono master a few years ago, where we hand sewed the whole kimono with fabric shipped from Japan, and it did give me a pause a bit to realize all the work that goes into sewing a kimono. And I remember our kimono teacher came into class one day wearing a $10,000 kimono. I mean, so I know how precious they can be and how special the kimonos are. But the kimonos that I chose to cut, a lot of them had moth holes or damaged, or had different things that were, made them less than perfect. So in a way, I feel like I was bringing them to life in a way that would never have been possible before. So, yes.
Okay, so we have a question from Eileen. This seems like it could be for everyone, or maybe for Jerry, since he's one of the curators. Any thoughts on doing a similar exhibition for Yonsei or even eventually Gosei generations?
Resilience, like I came out of meeting a museum person, and it blossomed into this group exhibition. This new project that I mentioned, which I'm calling the Legacy of Gaman, I have to ask the artists that I'm inviting, are you a Sansei? And because I know of their art, and there have been people that are not, and it's kind of making me want to do a phase 2 of the project and invite the Yonsei in, at least, and to start to open up that response to the questions I had, and to see what that looks like. But all of these things can lead to exhibitions, of course, and there's definitely I don't know. I think as we go, we just keep showing ourselves the next steps, and I think that's that is definitely potential horizon thing to have happen. Different new exhibitions with other generations involved, because we're kind of leading the way, trying to to keep this whole story going in some way, but to make it relevant and connect to the contemporary times.
I think we're about at time, sadly, but we can maybe go over just a little bit.
I wanted to add just one thing. If anyone wants a catalog, we'd be happy to mail it to you. So if you want to contact us, if you're not in Portland.
So Jerry and Kristine and Naomi, on behalf of the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, we thank you so much for your thoughtful and important work. We hope all of you that are here tonight will spread the word to come to the museum and see this work up close. And so thank you again, Erin, for your technical assistance. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Thank you, Lucy, for your work at the museum. And we hope we will see you all very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.